following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. What a bad, crazy week, huh? Wow. This week, we're going to talk about not making it too hard for other people to care about you. That is a double negative. I am aware. I will unpack. This show was originally going to be about what someone's favorite Disney princess or Avenger or Batman villain said about them, but then the whole tariff thing happened. Among the 50,000 other bad, crazy things going on in the world right now, what is going on? Things are tense and uncertain, and it's hard on everyone. Emphasis on everyone. And the messaging of unity and we're all in this together, well, that started, but those are platitudes that don't last if there's someone involved who wants to exploit that attempt at unity to control other members of the unit. And, they don't do it on purpose, usually. It's usually instinctive. That's when you have to set boundaries, and that's when they start going, but I thought you wanted unity, as an excuse. A person truly invested in unity is willing to give as well as take, which is another thing that's easy to say you want to do, but much harder to actually do it. Because someone always has to be the first one to give. And if no one wants to be that person because they think it's weakness, we get things like these stupid tariff threats that hurt everyone involved for completely nonsense reasons. You can solve problems without making threats. I referred to Donald Trump in a conversation this week as the entire world's abusive spouse. And even though that's, I recognize, a dramatic metaphor, I stand by it. If this tariff war was a personal relationship, we'd all see it for the abuse dynamic that it is. I'm going to threaten you until you give me something. Then I'll temporarily retract the threat without taking off the table. So you know it's coming again next month. So next month you'll give me even more, at which point I'll repeat the cycle until you have nothing else to give. And then I'll tell you that you're worthless, even though you clearly had a ton of things worth extracting. Meanwhile, the people on the other side who are being threatened manipulate and cajole and, pretend to be giving him things that really aren't giving up very much. So we've got, the bully and the manipulator, and none of it is productive. Abuse doesn't make sense. That's part of why it's abuse. Trump, for all his money, power, infamy, and influence, is the type of person who is just too hard to deal with. Boundaries don't exist. Nothing anyone does will ever be enough. Now, in Trump's case, the people that try to work with him tend to end up in prison while he skates, but that's just, the extreme that outlines the rule. This sort of, some people call it, emotional or psychic vampirism. It's infectious. So I want to talk about how to not do that, not just be too much for the people around you. Now, it's okay to be a lot, but a lot is not too much, right? I'm going to do it using a top 10 countdown list, all right? Because lists are fun, and anticipating finishing the list produces dopamine, right? And it's funny the way some people have seized on the fact that I do top 10 phrases on this show as a point of mockery, but there's a reason I do things like this. The idea of predicting the top 10 phrase, the idea of wanting to know what's coming next, that anticipation is fun for our brains. We like anticipation and reward, not just unexpected reward. Now, this list is guaranteed to include something you listening out there have done. This list contains a lot of things I have done. And I want to be absolutely clear. If something feels familiar, it doesn't mean you're unlovable. It just means that there's something within your control to change to make it easier for the people around you to be there for you and to make connections with you in these extremely challenging times. Any little change you can make lets people show you're trying, and that means a big deal. It gives you extra seconds on the clock, so to speak. And, that idea of connection might be a good place to start on our list. So here we go. Number 10, the 10 ways you're making it too hard for the people around you to care about you. Number 10, being emotionally disconnected. Now, people are nodding. Yeah, we think about this as often someone being cold or distant, pushing people away. But an emotional disconnect can include toxic positivity and shutting down negative conversations. If you can't deal with the bad as well as the good, people will have to adapt accordingly, especially if you yourself waffle between everything being awful and then everything being happy, happy, happy. No one believes that you're happy, happy, happy. It's actually terrifying to be around someone who is practically suicidal one month, euphoric the next. It means the people around you can't talk about what's bothering them because they're afraid of setting you off and hastening the inevitable crash. And after a while, people can't stick around for that crash again. Opening up to someone is difficult, especially if they have a history of being mocking or critical when you tried. I'm not minimizing that. Hear me out. Keep in mind that this stuff, your side of the emotional connection, is about what your behavior says about you as a person. The other person's behavior is on them. This is why I say, top 10 phrase, be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. You don't have to throw your emotional doors wide open and just say, everybody come trample me, right? No, you don't need to do that. A simple, I'm really struggling right now. I just wanted to be accountable for that. That's enough, right? It's all about being authentic and doing the work and taking little risks. The people who truly care about you don't want you to be fake happy. They want you to take steps to truly be happier. If you won't have the difficult conversations, if you dismiss things as negativity or disloyalty, people are going to find others who don't reject their concerns and don't recognize that the harder things get, the more people need to talk. People can only live with the emotional equivalent of a brick wall for so long. And it doesn't matter if that brick wall is painted black, red, or bright pink with a bright yellow smiley face on it. No matter how you try to hide it, if you don't trust others with your real feelings, and that's what you're doing when you're faking happy, 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 they're getting the message loud and clear that you don't trust them. And that damages relationships, especially with people who really have put in the effort to be there for you. This is a blunt statement, but we got to go there. Being an emotional coward comes in many forms. And it's easy to blame other people. Find the one thing that they did perhaps years ago that seems to explain your unwillingness or incapacity to be emotionally present. But this stuff is rooted in childhood. And it's probably less that you can't admit to the other person that you're feeling vulnerable. It's likely more that you can't admit it to yourself because you see emotional vulnerability as weakness instead of an opportunity for bravery. Think about that again. I'm going to repeat it. Being emotionally vulnerable isn't weakness. Being emotionally vulnerable is an opportunity for bravery. Now, since I already brought up mockery and criticism a few minutes back, let's go there next. But let's take a break because I want everybody to sit with the idea that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's an opportunity for bravery. This is very, very important when it comes to not making it too hard to care about you. Do you have a story about something you care about that would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Email me at Liana@nottherapyshow.com. NotTherapyShow.com is the website. At NotTherapyShow on socials. We'll be back soon. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. Still talking about the top 10 ways you might be making it too hard for people to care about you. And I apologize with all the water sloshing sounds in this show. It's dry. It's the dead of winter. It's dry here in Canada. But before the break, we talked about emotional avoidance, including faking being happy, right? And I brought up mockery and criticism as a reason it's too hard, for people to care about you. And I think people in general accept the concept that someone who is mocking and or critical is hard to be around. At least when it's other people mocking and criticizing. When it's us doing the mocking and criticizing, then we have reasons and people need to learn to handle said criticism. And that is the number 9 way that you're making it too hard to care about you. Because here's the thing. No, they don't need to learn to handle criticism, especially not on your timeline, especially when it comes to their feelings. Criticism puts you in a superior position over the other person, which is why your boss is allowed to criticize you. But it's usually not a good idea to criticize the boss unless you have an absolutely excellent boss. No one on equal footing to you socially is required to accept your criticism or even listen to it. They don't have to take it well. You can't force them to be okay with it. And if you're going into an exchange not recognizing that criticism hurts, it reads to the brain like physical pain, and that matters, that exchange is probably not going to go well. It doesn't matter if you say, what, I'm just saying how I feel. What, I'm just telling the truth. It doesn't matter. The truth hurts sometimes. That doesn't mean don't do it. It just means going in, recognizing when something is going to sting. Now, mockery, on the other hand, mockery is just, it's mean, okay? And yeah, we all do it sometimes. I do. And, sometimes it's sort of meant as a joke, but it's not the nicest joke. And you have to be prepared that if you mock someone, they may want to get away from you. And that's why, the idea of, mocking people who are different, who you don't really care if they stick around, that tends to be something like, all right, fine. Be prepared to accept the consequences of mockery. Because here's one thing that's a consequence of mockery. If you're like me, I've found the meanest people out there also have skins as thin as paper. So if you're someone who heavily relies on mockery, you're going to read to me as painfully insecure. Again, we all snap and we all get mean sometimes. Sometimes things come out as meaner than we intended it. It just lands wrong. And we need to make it right when we do, right? You don't have to say you did something deliberately to say you're, sorry it landed that way. If your defense mechanism, however, if you feel criticized or you feel attacked and your defense mechanism is being mean and critical right back, well, think about that, right? If someone didn't intend for something to sting the way it did and you come back all snarly, well, they're going to go, what the heck did I do to deserve that? And that damages the relationship. And people remember your tendency to bite that way, even if you stop doing it. It's not enough to just stop doing it. And why? Why? That's not fair. I stopped doing it. Yeah, but it's like the tariff pause I talked about in the first part of the show. The threat is always there. Trump can always come back and go, no, I'm putting tariffs on now, right? And here we go again. And good, crazy people, I never say sane, good, crazy people don't want to bother with someone who constantly has that threat of criticism and mockery. It just makes conversations too exhausting. You constantly have to be prepared for someone to bite back when they feel stung. And ladies, there isn't a separate set of rules for you. Real talk here. If you go into the, oh, poor baby, oh, come on, man up routine, when men try to express vulnerability, that is mockery. That's going to make him less likely to open up, especially when you go, oh, I wish he'd talk about his feelings more, and then go, oh, poor baby, when he does. Give me a break. Mockery, real talk, is petty, okay? It's petty. We all have the capacity for pettiness. And we all have to accept that when we do it, there are consequences. Like I said, sometimes people perceive something as criticism or mockery that wasn't intended as such. I had a situation like that where I just stated what happened to me. And someone says, all right, that's fair criticism. And I was like, that wasn't criticism. That was just me stating what happened. Like, that can be worked through, right? And this is where it's really important to, people are not allowed to use their thin skin against you. And you are not allowed to use your hurt to make someone believe that they actually intended something that they didn't. You know how you meant something, right? And it's possible, and I encourage this, like, you can accept that something landed as criticism, but also be absolutely sure that you didn't mean it that way. And that's really important in terms of boundaries. It's very important that we learn that just because we're hurt, and it may be easier in the short term to go, oh, they totally meant to, so I can fight back, right? You got to be careful that you're not slipping into bully territory there, right? Because the worst critics and bullies use any hurt they feel as an excuse to be mean because they claim you meant to hurt them, right? Now, think about that. When someone's like, you meant to, and then they're ready for a fight, that says something about their inner workings, right? It's a tell of sorts. It suggests that when they do hurtful things, it's deliberate, right? If you've got someone in your life who, has a habit of insisting you meant to do things that you know you didn't, ask yourself, what is going on there? Don't just let that become normal in your relationship. Because the concept that they know better than you what you intended is patently absurd. Now, there are, certain things that are just, not paying attention is not a good excuse. For instance, continuing to make the same mistake again and again and again. I didn't mean to, where's thin? It is possible that you do need to pay better attention. That's possible, right? But it could also be that they're telling you that their own cruelties that they didn't mean to do are more intentional than you thought they were, or even they thought they were. And I know that's kind of doublethink, but I've seen this in people. People equate being mean because they're hurting with not meaning to be mean. And that's lacking self-awareness. And speaking of self-awareness, if you keep assuming that other people are hurting you deliberately, they totally meant to do it, really ask yourself why, right? If somebody continues to hurt you, why are you continuing to be around them? Maybe, just maybe, you're using that, oh, they meant to do it, as a pretext to deflect and project your pain onto them. And that's the number 8 way that you're making it too hard to care about you. Deflection, projection, and transference. Deep dive here. This is going to be really just scratching the surface, but here we go. Deflection is essentially, broad strokes, attacking or blaming another person rather than accepting criticism or blame for your own actions. See how it's tied into what I'm doing here? Like, oh, they deliberately tried to hurt me. Well, that actually doesn't give you the right to just hurt them back. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Projecting, on the other hand, is taking your own feelings and displacing them onto a different person, animal, or object. A lot of things get broken and a lot of pets get yelled at because of this. But here are some signs you might be projecting, right? I see this one a lot. They hate me. That's mind reading. Hate is a very, very strong emotion. And I see a lot of people say that. A lot of women say this instead of admitting that they don't like the other person, right? That is a classic example of projection. Now, psychological transference is a related but separate phenomenon. Right? Psychological transference happen when people redirect emotions or feelings about one person to an entirely separate individual. So transference can really mess up relationships because you may be attributing negative emotions to someone just because they remind you of someone else, often a parent, right? And these similarities, a tone of voice, a turn of phrase, they may only be surface. For instance, if you're assuming someone is judging you just because someone in the past judged you under similar circumstances, you're transferring. That's the time where you catch the assumption and check it out. If you have this certainty that you state, you hate me, you don't love me, and you get a completely confused reaction, give that reaction some weight, please. Again, if you're telling someone that you know what's in their head more than they do, it's probably not going to go over well. Deflection and projection occur when what's going on inside us is overwhelming or unbearable. So the way to minimize deflection and projection is working on your overwhelm. Psychological transference is part of a trauma response. And so all 3 things are all about be gentle and compassionate with yourself. Hold yourself accountable without blame. Top 10 phrase, self-esteem cannot exist without self-compassion. The important thing is to make these little changes. And sometimes that means admitting you were the person who screwed up. And that means, really learning, really internalizing that admitting error doesn't mean that another person can do anything they want to you. All these other things, all these other sort of rules for conduct still count. Now, admitting you made a mistake doesn't instantly make everything all better either. If you can't handle others ever being angry at you, that's going to damage your relationships. Anger is not the same thing as rage, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to the break, come back, and talk about another thing before we get to rage, that damages a relationship that tends to be unintentional. Again, unintentional. We're going to talk about stonewalling when we come back. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow is our social media handle. The seventh way you're making it hard to care about you, stonewalling, when we come back on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about 10 ways you're making it too difficult for the people around you to care about you. And we've done some if you're just joining us on radio. Number 10 is being emotionally disconnected. Number 9 is mockery and harsh criticism. Mockery. Number 8 is deflection, projection, and transference. And this was one that I made clear. We're often not aware we're doing it. Number 7 is the same way. We are often not aware that we are stonewalling. But stonewalling makes it very hard for people to care about you. Stonewalling is a tough one to overcome because it's a combination of overwhelm and learned family patterns, right? If one of your parents just shut down and refused to speak to you, especially if they claimed it was because something you did, you'll reach adulthood thinking that's normal. And it may be normal. The signs of stonewalling are everywhere, right? Verbal, non-verbal. I prefer to call it physical stonewalling as opposed to non-verbal stonewalling. Again, as we get into examples, everyone does at least one of these things sometimes. You're not gonna, not everybody is going to abandon you because you get overwhelmed and shut down. Some. If it becomes characteristic, if it's your go-to, that becomes a problem. And it's amazing how many people stonewall as a go-to. Verbal stonewalling is the one we know best, the silent treatment. But it can also be changing the topic, offering surly 1 to 2 word responses. Fine, right? Refusing to answer questions, that's also verbal stonewalling. Filibustering, which we hear in political terms. But when people give very, very long answers to kind of go around the garden path, to kind of talk their way out of it, it is a fawn response to panic. But it's also a form of verbal stonewalling, which is why it's important to work on it. You see how the 1 to 2 word answers, like it's a freeze, right? The fawn response, verbal stonewalling. There's a lot of panic responses tied up in stonewalling. Being dismissive, accusatory, or aggressive, that fight response, right? If these are all things that are designed to end the discussion or stop it dead in its tracks, this is all verbal stonewalling. Now, nonverbal stonewalling is that flight response, right? And nonverbal stonewalling or physical stonewalling is not just needing a break. It's behavior that causes things to break. I'm talking getting up and walking away without a word instead of saying, look, I'm overwhelmed. I need 20 minutes. I really want to come back and talk to you about this. I just need a break. That's extremely different than just getting up and walking out of the room, right? Now, this is difficult because some people classify eye rolling, a lack of eye contact, and a closed off posture as nonverbal stonewalling. Now, to me, eye rolling feels more like mockery. I'm really careful about the eye contact thing because autistic people struggle with eye contact a lot, and stress makes making eye contact even harder. So don't assume that everybody who doesn't make eye contact with you during tough conversations is stonewalling you. Sometimes I close my eyes to try to really focus and not react. I'm trying to listen to understand instead of listening to respond. But if someone is telling you that, say, your tendency to fold your arms is communicating something negative, it could mean you do that to concentrate, right? Or it could be a self-soothe gesture, but be sensitive to the impact it's having on the other person. Don't just dismiss it. Because if someone says, you're sitting there folding your arms and you're not looking at me and you're rolling your eyes and you're shaking your head and it's really, really, really hard to not feel rejected when you're doing it. That's not why I'm doing it. It's not enough. That's another dismissal, right? That is sort of its own form of stonewalling. Someone can't have the conversation with you. They're telling you this is how it makes them feel. You not intending to do it, valid. Their feelings are also valid. Now, okay, exception to the misunderstanding rule for physical stonewalling, taking out your phone and starting to mess with it. That is undeniably derailing the conversation, right? If there's something you've forgotten, oh God, I have to let them know I'm going to be late, that sort of thing. Communicate that, right? If you are looking something up because you're having a hard time expressing yourself, communicate that. Don't just escape into your phone, okay? Very, very important. You'll notice the pattern here. Avoiding stonewalling is all about communication. If you need a break, say so. And say approximately how long. Don't just walk out. Stating your intentions is the difference between something coming across as stonewalling and it not being, right? We can be mindful of answers that are too clipped, confusing, and unintentionally dismissive. I try to go for brevity, like I try to keep my answers as short as possible so misunderstandings don't happen. Some people find that too abrupt. Okay, fine. No bad intentions. I'll adjust some. Bottom line. If someone says they felt dismissed or accused in response to an approach you took, it's more productive to express caring about that than to just get defensive. Now let's talk about offensiveness. Offensiveness. Okay, double-edged sword. Defensiveness. Defensiveness is the number 6 way that you're making it too hard to care about you. Now, again, we all get defensive sometimes. Some things hit us just out of left field. It's like, but if we're chronically defensive to the point that admitting we were wrong or that we made a mistake or, heaven forbid, apologizing for something, if that's like pulling teeth for you, that's a problem. If you struggle to say you're sorry or admit error before the other person doesn't first, or if you extract concessions like Trump in a trade war, dangling the apology as a carrot, or if your apologies are the I'm sorry you feel that way variety, that is not an apology. If you're doing that because you're supposed to apologize, but apologizing just makes you feel weak or defeated, after a while, it is too hard to care about someone who can never be wrong. This is where we get into the cliche of advice for men in relationships. Just say you're sorry. No, really. Just say you're sorry. And men are like, yeah, but I don't want to admit I'm wrong. No. You're distinguishing yourself from all the men in the past that couldn't say they were sorry. Well, some women have trouble apologizing too. Yes, a lot of people's mothers. Possibly your mother, which is why you have trouble apologizing, right? I'm not going to belabor this one because we could go on for the rest of the time. But the defensiveness, it's become extremely trendy as an okay when we do it in various political activist circles, and it's spilling into personal relationships. And keep in mind, relationships are always about healthy, happy compromise. You have to be able to have happy compromise. And if any admission that you may have been in the wrong makes you unhappy, you're not going to be able to have those closely bonded relationships. It's a requirement for getting on with other people. So if you have real trouble admitting you're wrong, even if you have your reasons, that is making it too hard to care about you. Now let's move on to number 5. And this is another one that should be obvious, but People make a lot of excuses. Number 5 ways you're making it too hard for other people to care about you. Lying. Lying makes you very difficult to care about. This includes lies of omission and lying to yourself. Now again, everybody lies sometimes. But do you come clean when you're directly confronted? Did you go, okay? Or do you go to the mat to maintain your comfortable fictions over the uncomfortable truths? Sometimes the worst lie you can tell, I'm going back to number 10 here about, emotional distance. Sometimes the worst lie you can tell is saying you're fine when you're not. And that's an understandable lie, right? Some people just go, I'm fine out of reflex. That's kind of small. The bigger the lie, the longer the lie, the harder it is to forgive. The more lies you tell to cover up your first lie, harder to forgive. And people know this. So sometimes people just lie to themselves about the size of the lie they're telling. If it involves money, that lie's gonna sting. If it involves something that somebody might make a different choice if they knew, that lie's gonna sting. Sometimes people lie for seemingly noble reasons, not wanting to burden people, trying to keep the peace, trying to spare people's feelings. But it's very important to remember that a lie for good reasons is still a lie, and if you get caught, people have the right to be upset with you for lying. And there's a related concept that I just took for granted, but I've discovered that it doesn't track smoothly across all social groups or socioeconomic brackets, and this is the concept of BS. I can't say the word that I used back in the day, still do, in this format, right? Gotta keep it clean. But you know what I'm saying. BS. BS is this thing between telling the truth and, outright lying. BS is posturing. It's fronting, right? We're fronting. It's being inauthentic without quite being dishonest to anyone but ourselves. Where I come from, friends call each other on the BS because the BS is rooted in the trauma and the drama. Calling BS from where I come from, it means, look, it's okay to just drop the front and be real. But the longer I'm out of Jane and Finch, the more I learn that calling BS doesn't mean the same thing, and I'm going to come right out and say it. Whiter, wealthier spaces. Calling someone on their BS, people react as if you just called them some filthy liar. It's cruel, right? And I'm not going to say who's right or wrong here because it's a matter of perspective. If somebody legitimately feels that way, all right, cool, fair. I'm just going to make a case for embracing the category of BS, okay? Because BS isn't conscious lying. It's what people call a reality distortion field. They said Steve Jobs, Apple guy, had a reality distortion field. It allowed him to be wildly successful in business. It also convinced him that it was a great idea to not seek real medical treatment for a completely treatable form of liver cancer that ended up killing him. Right? That's the thing about BS. It doesn't matter how successful your BS is in the short term if your BS is killing you. And BS tends to. Where I grew up, Jane Finch, it meant getting into drugs, having unsafe sex, even doing criminal activity. That kind of BS involves convincing yourself that you don't have other choices. And you convince yourself that you don't have other choices to give yourself permission to make the easiest short-term choice, even though a part of you knows that negative consequences could come. That's usually what BS involves. Getting tunnel vision, learned helplessness, or other things that blind us to better choices because the better choices are hard. And that's a good place to pause for our last break. When we come back, the remaining 4 ways you're possibly making it too hard to care about you. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website, at nottherapyshow on socials. Back in a bit on Is Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about 10 ways you're making it too hard to care about you. We've done 6 so far. I've got 5 minutes left. Here we go. Countdown. Number 10 ways making it too hard to care about you. Being emotionally disconnected. Number 9, mockery and harsh criticism. Number 8, deflection, projection, and transference. Number 7, stonewalling. Number 6, chronic defensiveness and not being able to apologize. Number 7, lying and BSing, my beloved category of BS. And that brings us to number 4. And I admit I'm struggling with the order of these last 4, so I'm just going to pick one. We're going to go number 4, not respecting boundaries. Top 10 phrase, other people don't have to like your boundaries. They do have to respect them. And you have to respect other people's boundaries. If people don't get that setting appropriate limits on conversations and actions make things more predictable and reduce conflict, then these people see boundaries as rejection or spoiling for a fight. If you're a boundary buster, it does not matter why you bust boundaries. I forgot. I didn't mean to. Doesn't change the fact that you did. You did bust that boundary. And after you do this enough times, good, crazy people are going to get fed up. But then there's this other class of people who don't just forget about boundaries. They get actively offended by them. They throw them back in your face. This is what I believe people mean by the term weaponizing boundaries that's become popular on the internet. I'm not totally on board with this term because if a boundary is weaponized, then it's not a boundary. It's manipulation, punishment, or a control tactic, right? A boundary is a tool to facilitate healthy conversation and mutual respect. But I suppose if you look at boundaries like a tool and recognize that sometimes a tool like a hammer can be used as a murder weapon, yeah, okay. That's where people get weaponizing boundaries come from. So I'm making space for something I don't totally agree with. But here's why I don't totally agree with it, okay? The concept of weaponizing boundaries can also be weaponized. It's happened to me. Oh, she's weaponizing boundaries because I had a firm boundary and there were consequences for violating the boundary, right? That's not okay. That kind of stuff, it makes you too hard to care about it. If you're using so-called boundaries as a way to get back at someone for setting boundaries with you, that's not a boundary. That's mocking the concept of boundaries. But you're not just mocking the concept of boundaries, you're mocking the person who set them. Go back to number 10, mockery as a way that makes it too hard to care about you. Let's move on because I talk about boundaries a lot on this show, so we don't need to do more. Number 3, being unreliable and dramatic. It goes without saying that people will eventually get fed up if you're chronically unreliable. But being emotionally unreliable in the form of crying wolf is a similar problem, right? If you have extreme responses to everything, if everything is either the greatest thing or person ever or the worst thing or person ever, then people can't tell when something is really serious and they eventually get fed up of the roller coaster. A little emotional moderation goes a long way regarding people feeling like you're putting in as much work and self-control as they are regarding getting along and keeping everything on an even keel. This is especially important. And again, I'm somebody with PTSD. I'm talking about myself here. This is especially important to not be too dramatic if you struggle with suicidal thoughts or trauma triggers. If everything is a trigger, no one will be comfortable saying anything to you. And there's only so many times you can claim to be actively suicidal only to be seemingly okay again in a few days. You do that enough times, people are going to start thinking you're crying wolf and attention seeking, even if you're not. The best person to talk to about suicidal thoughts is a licensed therapist who has the power to do things to keep you safe when you're not thinking clearly. Your friends, family, even the police aren't trained to handle these sorts of crises, right? Right. Everybody else can just help and support. They can't do it for you. So with precious little time, number 2, ways you're making it too hard for people to care about you: substance abuse. You cannot expect others to just sit there and watch you drink or use yourself to death. Get the help you need. And number 1, lashing out. This should be no surprise. But a lot of people don't understand what it means to lash out. I'm angry at you right now is not the same as I hate you and everything you do is wrong. Some say that lashing out is a side effect of shame. It can also be a response to fear or a sense of helplessness. When someone's bullied or abused, they might snap one day. It happens to the best of us, again. But too many people don't realize how much anger they're walking around with, so it sprays everywhere. Or when people aren't in touch with their own feelings, they have an unrealistic expectation that other people should just remain calm when they're screaming, because they're not feeling their fear when people scream at them. Just being calm. You can be outwardly stoic, but being calm when someone is decidedly not calm, that's not how empathy interplays with strong emotions, right? Furthermore, people experiencing rage are unpredictable, and no one is required to take abuse. No one is required to deal with your name calling, your blame game. It's not a test of love if they stick around after you've treated them poorly. That's codependence. And your guilt is likely to grow because a part of you knows you treated them poorly, and you know that someone with healthy self-esteem likely wouldn't put up with that. So if you're lucky enough to have a person who sees the hurt underneath your rage, that doesn't mean it's an invitation to lash out more. Furthermore, letting people behave poorly isn't love. It's enabling. Antisocial behaviors don't tend to get better on their own. So setting boundaries with loved ones with anger problems is the kindest thing to do. Obviously, if there's a risk of violence, protect yourself and any children first. All right, that's our list of 10 ways that you might be making it too hard to care about you. I'm doing this because we're in tough times and we gotta get through the next 2 years at least, right? If you have a specific question about anything I've talked about on this show, email me, Liana@nottherapyshow.com. Again, if you've heard something on this episode that feels real familiar, don't worry. It doesn't mean you're unlovable. It just gives you control over something you can improve. And I cannot control the time. I am out of it. Thanks for listening. Remember, your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you.